It was a summer that smelled of dust and cigarette smoke, the kind that clung to the curtains and the clothes of everyone in that old city by the coast. The heat sat heavy on the air, and the nights hummed with restless engines and broken dreams. People knew when to keep quiet there. They knew which streets to walk down and which ones to cross themselves before passing. It was a city that smiled in the daylight but whispered threats in the dark. And somewhere deep within that mix of money, blood and fear lived a man no one dared to cross. Salvatore Marino, the man everyone simply called the boss. His empire wasn't built with kindness or mercy. He ran it from the shadows of luxury, behind the walls of a marble mansion that overlooked the sea. The mansion was a fortress of glass and silence, guarded by men who never spoke unless spoken to. Inside, the chandeliers gleamed, the air smelled of expensive perfume, and the floors reflected faces that never smiled. But what made Salvatore untouchable wasn't just his money, it was his control. Over everything, over everyone. He didn't just own businesses, he owned people. Their loyalty was carved out of fear and stitched together with greed. Salvatore had one weakness, though. One thing that made him human. His son, Matteo. A boy with dark eyes and a quiet soul. He wasn't like his father. Where Salvatore barked orders, Matteo listened. Where Salvatore broke things to prove a point, Matteo built things to forget his pain. The boy grew up surrounded by bodyguards and secrets, but he longed for peace. He spent his nights at the piano, playing melodies no one taught him, his fingers tracing emotions words couldn't carry. He had a heart that didn't fit the world he was born into. And then there was the cleaning lady, Elena Rossi. No one noticed her much. She moved through that mansion like a ghost, carrying a bucket, a rag and a quire. Dignity. Every morning, she took the same old bus from the poor part of the city where the buildings were cracked and the streetlights flickered like dying stars. She worked silently, kept her head down, and never looked anyone in the eye for too long. People like her existed in the background of other people's stories, until something forced them into the center. Elena's daughter, Amara, was everything her mother wasn't allowed to be. Loud, curious, stubborn, brilliant. She read books late into the night, studied things far beyond what her teachers could explain. While her mother scrubbed the floors of the powerful, Amara dreamed of becoming a doctor. Not for money, not for fame, just because she wanted to fix what was broken in people. She had that hunger in her, that spark. Her teachers called her gifted. The neighborhood called her strange. But she didn't care. Life in that house and life in that slum could not have been more different. Yet fate has a strange way of drawing lines that connect opposites. It began subtly, almost too quietly to notice. Matteo had fallen ill. It started with headaches, then fainting spells, and soon his body refused to obey him. Doctors from all over Europe flew in, each one a new hope, each one leaving more confused than the last. Salvatore paid them all. He bought the most expensive medicine, the finest equipment, even the rarest specialists money could buy. But nothing changed. The boy with music in his veins was fading, and the man who controlled everything was losing control of the one thing that mattered most. The mansion grew quieter. The servants whispered in hallways. Even the guards looked uneasy. No one dared to speak of it, but everyone could feel it. The fear that money had finally met something it couldn't buy. Salvatore's temper grew darker with each passing day. People disappeared for saying the wrong thing. Doors slammed, glass shattered, and Matteo's mother, Rosa, prayed to saints she hadn't spoken to in years. One morning, while cleaning the West Wing, Elena overheard the doctor tell Rosa that her son had only weeks left. His body was shutting down, though no one knew why. It was as if something unseen was draining the life from him. Elena froze. She'd seen death before, in her neighborhood, in hospitals, in her own eyes when she stared too long in the mirror. But this was different. This was a rude person wearing an expensive suit. She wanted to walk away, pretend she didn't hear it, but something inside her refused. That night, she told Amara what she heard. They sat at the kitchen table under the flickering light bulb, the air heavy with silence. Amara listened, her eyes wide, her mind turning faster than her mother could keep up with. She'd read about illnesses that defied explanation. She'd studied strange cases in old books and medical journals she found online. Her heart ached, not for the powerful boy in the mansion, but for his mother, for the desperation in that house that no amount of wealth could erase. There was something else too, something deeper. Amara didn't believe in destiny, but she believed in purpose. And though she didn't know it yet, that conversation would pull her into a world she didn't belong to, a world where her brilliance would both save and destroy. Outside, the city kept moving. Neon lights flickered on the wet streets. Somewhere a car engine started and didn't stop. Somewhere else a deal was being made, a promise broken, a handshake, Ken over something deadly. Life went on, as it always did in that place. But inside the Marino mansion, time had stopped. The son of the most feared man in the city was dying, and no one, not the doctors, not the priests, not even his father, could do a thing about it. In another part of the city, a girl with nothing but knowledge and courage would soon walk straight into that world of power and corruption. And when she did, the line between mercy and danger would vanish. No one could have known that the girl whose mother scrubbed floors would soon hold the fate of the Mafia boss's son in her hands. And when she did, everything, the mansion, the empire, the illusion of control, would begin to crack. The city, as if sensing what was coming, seemed to hold its breath. It started small, the kind of moment no one pays attention to until much later, when they look back and realize it was the spark that lit everything on fire. The Marino mansion, once full of noise and command, had turned into a place where whispers carried more weight than words. The son of the Mafia boss, Matteo, lay in his room under soft white sheets, his body weaker every day. The doctors had started to stop pretending. They came less often now, and when they did, they spoke quietly, almost apologetically. Their eyes said what their mouths wouldn't. They didn't know what was killing him. Salvatore's fury grew colder instead of louder. At first he threw things, yelled, and made threats that sent men running. But soon he became quiet. Too quiet. He started sitting by his son's bed for hours, saying nothing, watching the monitors beep with mechanical indifference. The sight of Matteo's still hands, the slow rise and fall of his chest, turned something sharp inside him. The man who had crushed his enemies with money and violence now faced something that didn't care about either. Elena noticed the change in the house before anyone else. The silence was different now, heavier, filled with dread. Even when she cleaned Matteo's room, she could feel the grief hanging in the air, sticking to the walls. Rosa, Matteo's mother, had lost all color in her face. She wandered through the hallways like she was sleepwalking, clutching rosary beads so tight her fingers bled. Every sound made her flinch. Every shadow felt like a bad omen. Amara, meanwhile, couldn't stop thinking about Matteo. She didn't know him, had never spoken to him, but she couldn't shake his story from her mind. It wasn't pity. It was something else, something more personal. She'd spent nights reading medical studies, strange, rare conditions, theories and case files. She believed there had to be an answer, something the doctors were too arrogant or too afraid to see. When she told her mother she wanted to help, Eleanor looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "Amara, this isn't our world," Eleanor said, her voice trembling. "You don't go near those people. They don't see us as human." But Amara didn't listen. Something was burning inside her now, a mix of anger and compassion. She hated the thought of someone dying when there might be a way to stop it. She hated how helpless her mother sounded, how small she looked compared to the people she worked for. So one evening, after her mother fell asleep, Amara gathered her notes and slipped out of their apartment. The mansion was surrounded by guards, but she had grown up around them, saw them every day when she brought her mother lunch or waited outside the gates. She told one that she was dropping something off for her mother, her hands shaking, but her eyes steady. Maybe it was the innocence in her voice, or maybe the guard just didn't care that night. He let her through. Matteo's room was dim, the air filled with that faint hospital smell of disinfectant and dying hope. Amara stood there for a long moment, looking at him. He was pale, too pale, his face soft and still like porcelain. His hair stuck to his forehead, his lips dry. Machines hummed beside him, blinking slowly like tired eyes. She could feel the sadness in the room, thick and suffocating. She whispered his name once, just to see if he'd respond. He didn't. But when she stepped closer, when she placed her hand lightly on his wrist, his eyelids fluttered. His pulse quickened for just a second. It was small, but it was enough to make her heart race. That was the beginning of something neither of them understood. Over the next few days, Amara began to visit secretly, pretending to bring supplies or check on her mother's work. Rosa noticed small changes in Matteo first, the slight movement of his fingers, the color returning faintly to his cheeks. She thought it was her prayers being answered. The doctors said it was a coincidence. But when Salvatore saw it, he wanted answers. He called every doctor, demanded explanations. None could give him one. And then one afternoon he found Amara standing by Matteo's bed, holding a small jar of herbs and notes covered in scribbles. She froze, caught like a thief. "What are you doing here?" His voice was low, dangerous. Amara didn't lie. "Trying to help him." The room went silent. Even the machines seemed to pause. For a moment Salvatore just stared at her. A cleaning lady's daughter, standing in his house, claiming to heal what hundreds of experts couldn't. It would have been laughable, if not for what happened next. Matteo opened his eyes. It was brief, but enough. Enough to make the impossible feel real. Salvatore's expression shifted, something between disbelief and hope. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then, instead of ordering the guards to throw her out, he told her to stay. From that day, everything changed. Amara became a silent presence in the mansion. Rosa watched her with gratitude and suspicion all at once. Elena begged her daughter to leave before something went wrong, but Amara couldn't. Matteo was improving, slowly, but undeniably. She mixed herbs, created remedies, adjusted his food, even tried a few strange techniques she'd read about in old journals. Every improvement, no matter how small, felt like proof she was doing something right. But the better Matteo got, the more dangerous things became. The staff whispered that the boss's son was being healed by the cleaning lady's girl. Some said it was witchcraft. Others said it was a miracle. The rumors reached Salvatore's men, who didn't like the idea of a poor girl holding any kind of power over their boss. One of them, Marco, the boss's driver, started following Amara, watching her. Marco had always been loyal, but his loyalty came with envy. He had grown up in the same streets as Amara, but had chosen a different path. Violence instead of knowledge. Seeing her in the mansion, treated with rare respect, lit something ugly in him. He started cornering her in the hallways, asking questions that sounded friendly but weren't. When she ignored him, he spread stories. Salvatore didn't care for gossip, but he did care for control. The idea that someone else, especially a poor girl, might hold the key to his son's life made him restless. He began watching her too, quietly, calculating. He wanted to believe she was his salvation, but he also wanted to own her for it. Amara, meanwhile, was changing. She had never known power before, never known what it felt like to be needed by someone important. For the first time in her life, people listened when she spoke. They asked her questions. They respected her. But that respect came with danger. She could feel Salvatore's eyes on her, not just as a father desperate to save his son, but as a man obsessed with control. And Matteo? He started to depend on her too. Every day, when she walked into his room, his eyes followed her. He told her things he'd never told anyone. How he hated the life he was born into, how he wished he could escape it. He said she was the only thing that felt real in his world of money and lies. Amara felt it too, the pull between them. But she knew what would happen if anyone found out. Rosa's warnings echoed in her head, her mother's fear weighing on her heart. Still, she couldn't stay away. The mansion's air grew thicker with secrets. People started disappearing again. Servants who spoke too loudly, guards who asked too many questions. Salvatore's paranoia deepened. He stopped sleeping, started drinking. He demanded to know everything Amara did to his son, every ingredient, every method. He said it was for Matteo's safety, but she could feel the suspicion behind his eyes. Then came the night that changed everything. Amara arrived late, the rain pouring outside, her clothes soaked. When she entered Matteo's room, he was waiting for her, awake, smiling weakly. "You came," he said, voice hoarse. "I always do," she replied. He reached for her hand, and for a moment the world outside the mansion didn't exist. But the door opened suddenly. Salvatore stood there, eyes bloodshot, watching them. He didn't say a word. He just looked at their hands, at the closeness between them. Then he turned and walked away without a sound. That night, the guards received new orders. Marco was told to keep an eye on the girl. From then on, everything started to unravel. The same power that had given Amara purpose began to make others see her as a threat. Rosa avoided her, torn between gratitude and jealousy. Salvatore grew colder, torn between needing her and resenting her. Matteo's recovery became both a blessing and a curse. And Amara, she began to understand that the sickness in that house wasn't just Matteo's. It was in the walls, in the people, in the way power twisted love into something dangerous. Every step she took closer to saving Matteo brought her one step closer to destruction. And though she didn't see it yet, the real disease had nothing to do with his body. It was the darkness that surrounded them all, waiting for the moment to consume everything she loved. The night it happened, the sky was bruised with thunder. The sea outside the Marino mansion was restless, waves crashing against the rocks like they were trying to warn someone. Inside, the air was heavy with tension. Everyone felt it. The staff, the guards, even the silence seemed afraid. It had been weeks since Matteo had started walking again, weak but alive, and though the boy's recovery should have brought relief, it only made everything worse. Salvatore had grown colder. He no longer spoke, to Amara with the tone of a desperate father. He spoke to her like a man trying to control something slipping from his grip. He questioned her every move, demanded to see her notes, her herbs, and even searched her bag when she came through the gate. He told himself it was for Matteo's safety, but it wasn't. It was about power. He couldn't stand that his son owed his life to the daughter of a cleaning woman. Amara could feel it too. The looks, the whispers. Every time she passed through the marble halls, eyes followed her. Marco, the driver, watched her more openly now, sometimes smirking, sometimes glaring. Rosa stopped speaking to her altogether. She had once thanked Amara with tears in her eyes, but now she could barely stand to look at her. The miracle had turned bitter, and Matteo, he had changed too. The sickness had left his body, but not his mind. He loved Amara, or at least thought he did. He told her he wanted to leave everything behind, run away with her, start over somewhere no one knew his name. He said he'd trade all his father's money for just one night of peace. But Amara didn't believe in fairy tales. She knew that leaving the Marino family wasn't something anyone survived. That evening, she came to say goodbye. She had decided she couldn't stay any longer. Her mother had begged her to leave, and part of her knew it was already too late to fix anything. The mansion had swallowed too many lives, and she wasn't going to let it take hers. Matteo's room was dimly lit, rain tapping against the window. He looked up when she entered, his face pale but his eyes sharp. "You're leaving," he said quietly. She nodded. "I have to. Your father, he doesn't trust me anymore. It's not safe." He stood slowly, his hand trembling as he reached for her. "Please don't. If you go, he'll make me his prisoner again. You're the only reason I'm still alive," she interrupted, her voice soft but steady. "Matteo, you're alive because you fought to be. I only helped. Don't give me more power than I deserve." He took a step closer. "You don't understand what it's like here. You save me, and then you leave me in this prison." Before she could answer, the door burst open. Salvatore stood there, soaked from the rain, his face carved with rage. Behind him was Marco, holding a gun. Amara froze. Matteo turned, his body tense. "What is this?" Salvatore's voice was low but trembling with anger. "You think you can just take him from me? You think you can walk in here, poison my son, play the saint, and then walk away?" Her breath caught. "Poison? What are you talking about? I saved him." Salvatore stepped closer, his eyes wild. "No one heals without a price. You did something to him. You did something to me." Matteo moved between them, his voice breaking. "Father, stop. She didn't do anything wrong." Salvatore's hand shot out, grabbing his son's arm. "You don't see it, boy. She's made you weak. She's turned you against your own blood." The storm outside roared louder, lightning flashing through the window. Amara tried to step back, but Marco blocked the door. His face was blank, his hand steady on the gun. "Please," she said quietly, looking at Salvatore. "I only wanted to help." "Help?" he hissed. "You made me owe you. No one makes me owe them." Matteo shouted, "If you hurt her, I'll never forgive you." That was it, the final crack. Salvatore's control, already splintered by fear and pride, finally broke. He pushed Matteo aside, his hand reaching for the drawer where he kept his own gun. Amara saw the movement, her heart racing. She tried to run, but Marco grabbed her arm. Matteo lunged forward, shoving Marco back. The gun went off. The sound tore through the room, deafening. For a moment no one moved. Smoke filled the air. Tea, the smell of gunpowder mixed with the salt of rain. Amara's ears rang. She looked down. Matteo was on the floor, his white shirt blooming red. Salvatore stared, frozen, the gun still shaking in his hand. The reality didn't hit him right away. He didn't even seem to understand what he'd done. Matteo's eyes fluttered open, confusion and pain mixing in them. "Father," he whispered. The gun clattered to the floor. "No," Salvatore muttered, stumbling forward. "No, no, no." He dropped to his knees beside his son, pressing his hands over the wound. "Stay with me, Matteo. Stay with me." Amara knelt beside him, tears streaming down her face. Her hands shook as she tried to help, but Matteo's breathing was shallow. His body jerked once, then went still. The room fell into a hollow silence, broken only by the sound of rain. Salvatore stared at his son's face, his hands covered in blood. Then his eyes turned toward Amara, empty, dead. "This is your fault," he whispered. Amara backed away, shaking her head. No. It was you. You. Before she could finish, Marco grabbed her from behind. What do we do, boss? Salvatore's voice was calm now. Too calm. No one finds out about this. No one. Marco hesitated. The staff heard the shot. Then they'll say it was an accident, Salvatore said coldly. He looked at Amara like she was something inhuman. She came into my house and destroyed my family. She dies tonight. Amara fought against Marco's grip, screaming, clawing, begging. He was your son! You killed your own son! Salvatore turned away, unable to look at Matteo's still body. He was weak. That broke something inside her. All the fear, the guilt, the sorrow, everything turned to rage. She reached for the table beside her, grabbed a glass vial she'd brought earlier, and smashed it against the floor. Smoke hissed up from the chemicals inside. Marco coughed, his grip loosening just enough. Amara broke free and ran. The hallway blurred. Her heart pounded so hard it hurt. Behind her, she could hear shouting. Salvatore's voice, Marco's footsteps. She ran down the stairs, slipping on the marble, her hands smeared with Matteo's blood. When she reached the front door, she threw it open and disappeared into the storm. Back inside, Salvatore sank into the chair beside his son's body. The house was in chaos now, guards shouting, servants crying, the lights flickering. But he heard none of it. All he could see was Matteo's lifeless face, and all he could feel was the emptiness where his power used to be. Marco returned minutes later, drenched and breathless. She's gone. Salvatore didn't answer. He stared at his trembling hands. Find her, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Find her, and bring her to me. Marco nodded and left. The mansion that had once stood as a symbol of control was now just another crime scene, cold, blood-stained, and full of ghosts. Rosa collapsed when she saw what had happened, her screams echoing through the halls. The storm outside raged on, washing blood down the marble steps. Amara didn't stop running until she reached the edge of the city. She collapsed under a brae. Deej, shaking, soaked, broken. Matteo's last breath replayed in her mind over and over. She could still hear the sound of the gunshot, still see the look in Salvatore's eyes. She hadn't killed him, but she knew that didn't matter. In Salvatore's world, truth didn't exist, only power. And by surviving, she had just declared war on him. Somewhere behind her, sirens began to wail, carried by the wind. The world that had ignored her before would soon know her name, not as a healer, not as a genius, but as the girl who survived the night the MAFIA boss killed his own son. The storm finally passed by morning, but it left the world in ruins. The sea had calmed, the air heavy with the smell of rain and iron. The Marino mansion stood on the hill like a broken monument, its lights still on, its windows reflecting nothing but emptiness. Inside, time had stopped. The marble floors were clean again, the blood scrubbed away by silent hands. But everyone who lived there knew that no amount of cleaning could erase what had happened. The sound of that gunshot still echoed in every corner. Salvatore hadn't slept. He sat in the same chair beside Matteo's bed, his son's body gone now, taken away under the cover of darkness. No one dared to speak to him. No one dared to even look at him for too long. His wife, Rosa, was locked in her room, her cries muffled behind heavy doors. The once proud house had become a tomb filled with whispers and ghosts. He told the world what he had to tell them, that Matteo's death was an accident. A gun malfunction. A tragedy that happened while he was trying to protect his son. The family lawyer handled the paperwork, the police took their bribes, and the press printed what they were told. The newspapers called it the Marino tragedy, showing old photos of Matteo smiling beside his father, painting a story of loss and grief. No one questioned it. No one dared. In that city, people didn't ask questions about powerful men. But inside, Salvatore knew the truth was rotting him alive. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Matteo's face. Confused, terrified, betrayed. He heard the echo of his son's voice saying, "Father!" Before the silence swallowed it, he'd built his life on control, on fear, on never letting emotions interfere with power. Now the only thing he could control was his own guilt, and even that was slipping away. Rosa couldn't bear to look at him. She stopped eating, stopped speaking, stopped existing as the woman she once was. She spent her days staring out the window, whispering Matteo's name over and over, until her voice broke. In her mind, the house had become cursed. She told the maids to cover the mirrors, saying she could still see her son's reflection in them. At night, she swore she heard him playing the piano, the faint melody drifting through the halls even though the keys hadn't been touched since he died. Elena quit the same week. She didn't even collect her last pay. The guilt was too much to carry. The guide, Lort, of introducing her daughter to that house, of thinking good intentions could survive in a place built on violence. She never told anyone what really happened that night, not even the police when they came asking questions. She just said she didn't know. Maybe she truly didn't. Some things were too big to explain. Amara disappeared. For days the city buzzed with rumors. Some said she fled the country. Others said Salvatore's men had already found her and buried her somewhere no one would ever look. There were whispers in the poor neighborhoods about a girl who could heal with her hands, a girl who had stood up to the devil himself and lived to tell the tale. The rich called her a liar, a manipulator, the reason Matteo was dead. But the poor, the ones who had nothing, they called her the girl who survived. Salvatore's empire began to fracture. His associates grew restless, sensing weakness. They spoke in hushed tones about the boss's madness, about his sleepless nights and unpredictable rage. Some thought it was guilt eating him alive. Others thought it was fear. Either way, they knew power built on fear couldn't last long once that fear turned inward. Behind closed doors, Salvatore began to unravel. He stopped showing up at meetings, stopped answering calls. He drank more, locked himself in Matteo's room for hours, staring at the empty bed. He'd tell himself it wasn't his fault, that Amara had poisoned his son, that she'd put a spell on him, made him weak. But deep down, he knew the truth. He had pulled the trigger. He had killed his only son. The city started to turn on him. The press that once protected his image began to shift its tone. Whispers of investigation leaked out, stories about corruption, missing money, violent outbursts. Without Matteo, the gentle one, the one who humanized him, Salvatore was just another monster with a crumbling empire. Even his loyal men began to leave, quietly, one by one. Marco was still there, though, always watching, always waiting for orders that never came. Then one night, a package arrived at the mansion. No name, no return address. Just a small box wrapped in brown paper. Salvatore opened it himself. Inside was a single thing, a silver necklace with a cracked charm. Matteo's charm. The one he had given to Amara when she first helped him stand again. Salvatore's hands trembled as he stared at it. For the first time in months, he felt fear. Not of losing control, but of facing what he had done. Somewhere, Amara was alive. She had been hiding in a small coastal town 2 hours away, living under a different name, working quietly at a clinic. Her mother had joined her soon after leaving the mansion. They didn't talk about that night. They didn't talk about Matteo. But they carried him in silence, in the way they looked at each other, in the way Amara's hands still trembled whenever she treated someone who reminded her of him. At night, she dreamed of him, the music, the quiet smile, the way he said her name like it meant something. And every morning, she woke with tears she couldn't explain. She'd saved lives since then, helped people who couldn't afford hospitals, but it never erased the feeling that she had failed the one person she truly wanted to save. Her name spread quietly through the poor districts again. People came to her for healing, cuts, fevers, sick children. They called her the Black Genius, the miracle girl who cured with compassion instead of wealth she never asked for money. She only asked them to keep her name quiet. But in cities like that, secrets didn't stay buried for long. When word reached Salvatore that Amara was alive, something inside him changed. He could have sent his men. He could have finished what he started. But instead, he did nothing. Maybe he knew that finding her wouldn't bring his son back. Maybe he understood that killing her would be the final proof of what he'd become. Or maybe, for the first time, he just didn't have the strength to do anything at all. The media moved on eventually. The Marino tragedy became just another ghost story whispered by journalists, another symbol of how even the richest families couldn't escape their own sins. The mansion was sold years later, its walls stripped bare. But the locals said strange things still happened there, that the piano played by itself some nights, soft and mournful, like a boy saying goodbye to someone he never should have lost. Amara never went back. She built a quiet life, one where she was no longer a shadow in someone else's story. But sometimes, when she treated the sick and saw the relief in their eyes, she thought of Matteo, how his hands had trembled when he touched hers, how he had said she made him feel alive. She wondered if, wherever he was, he'd forgiven her. As for Salvatore, he lived long enough to watch everything he built turn to dust. He died alone in the same room where his son had taken his last breath. When they found him, there was a photo of Matteo on the nightstand and a half-empty glass beside it. His eyes were open, staring at the ceiling, as if waiting for someone who never came. The world forgot him, but those who had worked in his house never did. They remembered the sound of rain on the windows that night. They remembered the girl with fire in her eyes and the boy who wanted to be free. They remembered how quickly power turned into tragedy. And somewhere, far from that cursed mansion, Amara looked out over the sea, the same one that had watched over all their pain. The water shimmered under the fading sun, endless and calm. She took a deep breath, the wind brushing her face, and whispered his name one last time. Then she turned away, carrying her guilt and her gift into a world that for once felt quiet. Years later, the name Marino still carried a strange power, less like respect, more like a curse. It lingered in conversations, in courtroom whispers, in the way older citizens lowered their voices when recounting that night at the mansion. The newspapers had long stopped printing stories about it, but the echoes never truly died. Every few years, a journalist would reopen the case, chasing ghosts for ratings. And every time they found the same thing: silence, money, and a wound in the city's memory that refused to heal. When the official investigation was finally reopened, it wasn't out of justice. It was out of necessity. The new government wanted to clean its image, to show that no one was above the law, not even the dead. Files long buried were unsealed, names once untouchable suddenly dragged into daylight. The Marino estate, already in shambles, was seized under corruption charges. Offshore account, as bribes, shell companies, it was all laid bare. What they found wasn't just evidence of one man's sins. It was proof of an entire system that had looked away for decades. Salvatore Marino's legacy was rewritten by strangers. The same papers that once called him a visionary now branded him a tyrant, a killer, a man who built his empire on blood and silence. His business partners vanished from the public eye, pretending they'd never known him. The mansion became a historical footnote, a cautionary symbol of unchecked power and the rot it breeds. The court officially ruled Matteo's death a homicide, though with Salvatore long gone, justice came only in name. There was no trial, no punishment, no real closure. The ruling was ceremonial, a gesture meant to soothe the public conscience. But for those who had lived the story, it meant something more. It was, at last, the truth, acknowledged, written down, and preserved. Elena attended the final hearing. She sat quietly in the back, her hair now streaked with grey, her hands folded neatly in her lap. When the judge read the verdict, she didn't cry. She simply closed her eyes and let out a breath she'd been holding for years. For her, justice wasn't about punishment. It was about remembering without fear. She knew no ruling could bring back what had been lost, but hearing the truth spoken aloud gave her peace. Amara didn't attend. She heard about it through a newspaper clipping a patient handed her, unaware of her connection to the story. The headline read, "Case closed. The tragedy of Matteo Marino, officially declared homicide." She stared at it for a long time before folding it carefully and placing it in a drawer. It wasn't triumph she felt. It was quiet relief. The truth no longer belonged to her alone. In the years since she'd escaped, Amara had rebuilt her life piece by piece. She stayed in the coastal town, running a small clinic that treated anyone who walked through the door. People came from miles away, drawn by rumors of her gift. But she no longer called it that. To her, healing was no longer about miracles. It was about penance. Each person she saved became a way to make sense of the one she couldn't. She never spoke of Matteo, but she felt him everywhere, in the wind off the sea, in the music that sometimes drifted from radios in the nearby cafes. Sometimes, when she walked along the shoreline, she imagined he was beside her, his voice calm and soft, asking if she was finally free. She'd smile at the thought, knowing that freedom always came at a cost. The tragedy of the Marinos became a mirror for the city. It exposed what everyone had known but refused to say, that the line between power and corruption was thin, and that morality bent easily when wealth was involved. The newspapers ran editorials about systemic decay and ethical reform, but the people knew better. The story wasn't about politics. It was about people, how easily they were bought, how easily they forgot, how easily they forgave when it was convenient. The moral rot went deeper than one man's cruelty. It was a collective blindness, the city's willingness to trade truth for comfort. The same officers who'd buried evidence now gave speeches about justice. The same lawyers who'd profited from blood money now taught eths at universities. Everyone wanted to be absolved. No one wanted to remember. Yet the story lived on, not through headlines or official records, but through whispered warnings passed between generations. Parents told their children about the mansion on the hill, about the boy who had everything and the girl who had nothing, and how both were destroyed by the same thing, pride. The story became a modern ghost tale, stripped of its details, polished into myth. But beneath the myth lay a truth that could not be erased. Power without conscience always leads to ruin. For those who had been closest to it, the scars never faded. Rosa Marino, Matteo's mother, lived out her final years in a care home in the countryside. She never recovered from the night she lost her son. The staff said she spoke to him every day, humming lullabies as if he were still a boy. When she passed away, Amara learned about it from a local paper. She didn't attend the funeral, but she lit a candle for her, a small gesture for a woman who had once looked at her with both kindness and fear. Marco, Salvatore's most loyal enforcer, eventually turned himself in when the case was reopened. He confessed to falsifying police reports, hiding evidence, and covering up deaths ordered by his boss. He did it without remorse. "We all served something," he told the court. "Some of us served fear, others served money. He served himself." He was sentenced to life in prison, but even there, he remained unrepentant. To him, loyalty was its own kind of morality. And so the cycle of guilt continued. The tragedy left behind a city changed but not healed. For a brief moment, people demanded reform, stronger laws, transparency, oversight. Committees were formed, promises made. But time has a way of softening outrage. The world moved on. New scandals replaced old ones. The Marino case became a lesson cited in ethics courses, a documentary subject, and a cautionary tale. But the deeper message, the human cost of power, the fragility of conscience, faded into background noise. Yet somewhere, in the quiet of her seaside home, Amara carried it still. Her life had become a meditation on what it meant to live after violence. She understood now that justice was not a single act. It was endurance. To keep living, to keep feeling, to keep choosing compassion even after witnessing cruelty, that was her way of refusing to let the past win. In her clinic, a child once asked her why she always looked sad when she smiled. She didn't know how to answer. How could she explain that some sorrows never leave you, that they become part of your blood, shaping how you see the world? So she just said, "Because healing hurts sometimes." The child nodded, as if that made perfect sense. That night, she walked to the beach. The sky was clear, the sea calm, the moon a perfect mirror over the water. She stood there for a long time, her feet sinking into the sand, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to say it aloud. Matteo's name. It came out like a prayer, trembling but steady. The wind carried it out over the waves, and for a moment, she felt something lift, a weight, a silence, a memory too heavy to bear alone. In the end, the Marino tragedy was not about one family's downfall. It was about the quiet war between conscience and survival, about how easily love turns to destruction when pride stands in its way. It was about the way people justify cruelty until it destroys everything I claim to protect. There were no heroes in that story, only people, flawed, frightened, human. Some found redemption, others never did. But every one of them paid a price. And perhaps that was the closest thing to justice this world could offer, not retribution, but remembrance. The story endured not because it was extraordinary, but because it was universal. Power, guilt, love, loss, they belonged to everyone. As the waves pulled back into the dark, Amara whispered one final word: forgive. Not to absolve the dead, but to free the living,